She inherited an abandoned desert train station that hadn't seen a passenger in 40 years. Everyone called it a worthless relic, a money pit in the middle of nowhere. But when her 12-year-old son started hearing strange echoes beneath the floorboards, Isabella realized this crumbling station was hiding a secret worth $189 million that would change their lives forever. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what's the most unexpected thing you've ever inherited. The Mojave Desert stretched endlessly in all directions from Highway 127, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that connected nowhere to nothing. Heat waves shimmered off the pavement like liquid mercury, and the only movement came from tumbleweeds dancing across the barren landscape. In this forgotten corner of southeastern California, where the nearest gas station was 45 miles away and GPS signals came and went like desert mirages, stood the skeletal remains of what had once been the Goldfield Junction Railway Station. Isabella Moreau had never expected to inherit anything more valuable than her grandmother's recipe for tres leches cake. At 34, she was a single mother working as a night shift nurse at Riverside General Hospital, her days a blur of 12-hour shifts, grocery shopping on empty, and helping her son Marcus with homework she barely understood. Their small apartment in Riverside was clean but cramped, furnished with hand-me-downs and garage sale finds that she'd painted cheerful colors to hide their age. The certified letter from the San Bernardino County Clerk's office had arrived on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with credit card offers and utility bills. Isabella had almost thrown it away, assuming it was another piece of official-looking junk mail. But something about the heavy paper and embossed seal made her pause. Her great-aunt Esperanza, a woman she remembered only as a stern figure in a black dress who spoke Spanish and smelled of lavender, had passed away 4 months earlier in a nursing home in Barstow. The family had gathered for a modest funeral, dividing up her few possessions, a rosary collection, some jewelry, and a small savings account that barely covered the burial expenses. But according to the letter, one piece of property had remained unclaimed through some bureaucratic oversight. A railway station, the document stated, built in 1953 and officially abandoned in 1982. Along with it came 73 acres of high desert scrubland and whatever structures remained standing on the property. The letter included a hand-drawn map with an X marking the location, along with a set of tarnished brass keys tied with a faded red ribbon. Marcus, her 12-year-old son, had been intrigued from the moment she mentioned it. His eyes, the same warm brown as his father's, had lit up with the kind of excitement usually reserved for video games and pizza parties. A real train station, Mom? Like in the old movies? Isabella had tried to manage his expectations. It's probably just ruins, Mijo. The letter says it's been empty for 40 years. But Marcus was already planning their expedition, pulling up satellite images on his tablet and researching the history of desert railways. His enthusiasm was infectious, even as Isabella calculated the cost of gas for the 3-hour drive and wondered what kind of property taxes she might inherit along with the mysterious station. They made the journey on a Saturday morning in October, when the desert heat had finally loosened its grip and the sky stretched clear and blue from horizon to horizon. Isabella's aging Honda Civic protested as they turned off the main highway onto a dirt road that didn't appear on any map. The road wound through Joshua trees and granite outcroppings, past abandoned mines and sun-bleached cattle bones, climbing gradually into foothills that glowed amber in the morning light. There, Marcus pointed ahead, pressing his face against the passenger window. I can see buildings. Goldfield Junction Railway Station emerged from the desert like something from a fever dream. The main building was a long, low structure of terracotta brick and weathered timber, its mission-style architecture speaking of an era when railways carried more than just freight across the American West. Red clay tiles still clung to portions of the roof, though many had slipped and shattered on the platform below. The station's signature archway, built to frame the mountain view beyond the tracks, stood intact but stripped of its original wooden trim. A wooden sign, sun-bleached but still legible, hung at an angle above what had been the main entrance. Goldfield Junction, elevation 3,847 feet, established 1953. Beneath it, in smaller letters, someone had carved Gateway to the Golden State in elaborate script. Isabella parked near the platform and stepped out into the desert silence. The quiet was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the station's broken windows and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. This wasn't the romantic abandonment she'd imagined from old photographs. This was decay, pure and simple. Nature reclaiming what humans had briefly borrowed. The platform itself was concrete, cracked but still solid, stretching for nearly 100 yards along where the tracks had once run. Steel rails had long since been salvaged, leaving only the gravel roadbed and occasional railroad ties to mark the path of trains that would never return. Weeds pushed through every available crack, and small desert animals had carved burrows beneath the station's foundation. But as Isabella walked the length of the platform, she began to notice details that didn't fit the simple narrative of abandonment. The building was larger than necessary for a small desert stop, with multiple wings extending back from the main waiting area. The windows, though boarded over, were tall and elegant, framed with decorative ironwork that spoke of significant investment. Most puzzling of all, power lines still connected to the building, though she couldn't imagine who would maintain electricity to an abandoned station in the middle of nowhere. Marcus had already found his way inside through a door whose lock had surrendered to decades of desert weather. Isabella followed, using her phone's flashlight to navigate the interior. The main waiting room was spacious and surprisingly intact, its tile floors dusty but unbroken. Wooden benches lined the walls, and a large railway map of California still hung behind what had been the ticket counter, its routes marked in fading colors. "Mom, look at this," Marcus called from deeper inside the building. His voice echoed strangely, as if the space were larger than it appeared. Isabella found him standing in what must have been the station master's office, studying a collection of framed photographs on the wall. The images showed the station in its prime, gleaming silver passenger trains pulling up to crowded platforms, well-dressed travelers boarding with leather suitcases, and uniformed railway employees posing beside locomotive engines that seemed impossibly large and powerful. But it was the people in the photographs that caught Isabella's attention. Despite the 1950s setting, many of the passengers looked somehow out of place. Their clothing was expensive, their posture confident, but their faces carried the careful neutrality of people trying not to be remembered. In one photograph, she noticed a man in a dark suit standing apart from the crowd, watching the train with the intensity of someone expecting trouble. "Why do you think they really built this place, Mom?" Marcus asked, running his finger along the frame of a photograph showing the station's grand opening. "I mean, there's nothing here. No town, no mines, no reason for people to stop." It was a good question, one that had been nagging at Isabella since they'd arrived. Goldfield Junction sat at the intersection of absolutely nothing, hours from any significant population center. Building a station this elaborate in such a remote location would have cost a fortune, and railway companies in the 1950s weren't known for wasting money on unnecessary amenities. They spent the next hour exploring the rest of the building. Besides the main waiting area and offices, there were several smaller rooms whose purposes weren't immediately clear. One appeared to have been a restaurant or cafe, with a service counter and the remnants of booth seating. Another might have been a private lounge, furnished with more expensive fixtures than the public areas. But it was in the basement that things got really interesting. Isabella had almost missed the stairway, hidden behind a door she'd assumed led to a storage closet. The wooden steps descended into darkness, and her phone's flashlight revealed a space far more extensive than the building's footprint should have allowed. The basement was actually a series of connected rooms, carved directly into the rocky hillside beneath the station. "This is weird, Mom," Marcus whispered, his voice bouncing off stone walls. "Why would a train station need all this underground space?" The basement rooms were empty now, but they showed signs of having once been heavily used. Electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, some still containing thick cables that disappeared into the rock walls. In one room, Isabella found mounting brackets bolted to the floor, as if heavy equipment had once been installed there. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, though she couldn't identify any obvious source. Most puzzling of all, the basement showed signs of recent maintenance. While the upper station was clearly abandoned, someone had been keeping the underground areas in working order. The electrical systems were modern, the walls showed fresh concrete patches, and in several places, she found evidence of new construction that couldn't be more than a few years old. "Mom, I think I found something," Marcus called from the far end of the basement complex. Isabella hurried toward his voice, her footsteps echoing off the stone walls. She found him standing before a heavy steel door that looked completely out of place in the 1950s-era station. The door was modern, industrial-grade, with electronic locks and warning signs she couldn't read in the dim light. "It's locked," Marcus said, tugging on the handle. "But listen." Isabella pressed her ear to the cold metal and heard it immediately, a low, rhythmic humming coming from the other side. It was the sound of machinery, running quietly but continuously, as if it had been operating for years without interruption. "There's something down here, Mom. Something big." Isabella stepped back from the door, her heart racing. Great Aunt Esperanza hadn't just left her an abandoned train station. She'd left her something that was very much alive, something that had been running in secret beneath the desert for decades. As they climbed back up to the main level, Isabella's mind raced with questions. What kind of operation required this level of secrecy? Who was maintaining the equipment? And most importantly, what had her seemingly simple great-aunt been involved in that required hiding it beneath an abandoned railway station in the middle of the Mojave Desert? Standing on the platform as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Isabella realized that inheriting Goldfield Junction hadn't just given her property. It had given her a mystery that could change everything she thought she knew about her family and possibly her future. The mechanical humming continued below their feet, patient and persistent, waiting for someone to finally unlock its secrets. Cliffhanger ending. As Isabella and Marcus stood on the empty platform of Goldfield Junction Railway Station, the mechanical humming beneath their feet seemed to grow stronger in the evening quiet. Whatever was running down there had been operating in complete secrecy for decades, maintained by someone who clearly didn't want it discovered. Isabella's great-aunt Esperanza hadn't just left her a worthless building in the desert. She'd left her something that was very much alive, something worth hiding beneath tons of rock and steel. Isabella couldn't sleep that night. Back in their small riverside apartment, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully in the next room, his tablet still glowing with research about abandoned railway stations. The sound of that humming machinery echoed in her memory, rhythmic and purposeful, like a mechanical heartbeat buried beneath tons of desert rock. By Tuesday morning, she'd made her decision. She called in sick to the hospital, the first time she'd taken an unscheduled day off in 2 years, and drove to Home Depot. If someone was maintaining equipment beneath her inherited property, she had every right to know what it was. The locksmith she hired, a weathered man named Jim who specialized in vintage and unusual locks, made the drive to Goldfield Junction without asking too many questions. He took one look at the steel door's electronic locking mechanism and whistled low. "This isn't railway equipment, lady," he said, running his hands over the sophisticated digital display. "This is military-grade security. Biometric scanners, encrypted access codes, the works. Someone spent serious money keeping people out of whatever's behind this door." But Jim was good at his job. After 2 hours of careful work with specialized tools, the electronic locks finally surrendered with a soft click that echoed through the basement corridors. The door swung open to reveal not another room, but a tunnel carved directly into the mountainside. Emergency lighting flickered to life automatically, illuminating a passageway that stretched far beyond what Isabella could see. The air that rushed out was cool and carried the scent of electronics and recycled atmosphere. Marcus grabbed her hand as they stepped into the tunnel. "Mom, this is like something from a spy movie." The tunnel ran for nearly a quarter mile, sloping gently downward into the heart of the mountain. Along the walls, Isabella noticed ventilation systems, fiber optic cables, and what appeared to be a small rail system for moving equipment. This wasn't some simple storage area. This was a serious underground facility, built with the kind of resources that suggested government involvement. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern that took Isabella's breath away. The space had been carefully excavated and reinforced, its ceiling supported by steel beams that disappeared into shadows above. But it wasn't the engineering that made her gasp, it was what filled the cavern. Rows upon rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, stretching from floor to ceiling like a metallic honeycomb. Each box was numbered and secured with its own lock, and there were thousands of them. In the center of the cavern, modern computer terminals hummed quietly, their screens displaying scrolling data that Isabella couldn't decipher. "What is this place?" Marcus whispered. Before Isabella could answer, A voice spoke from the shadows near the computers. It's the most secure private banking facility in North America. And you, I assume, are Esperanza's niece. Isabella spun around to see a man in his 60s emerging from behind the equipment. He was well-dressed in a conservative suit, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite appearing in what was essentially a secret underground vault, he seemed completely at ease. "My name is Dr. William Chun," he said, extending his hand. "I've been waiting to meet you, Miss Moreau. Your great-aunt spoke of you often." Isabella found her voice. "You knew Esperanza? You know what this place is?" Dr. Chun smiled sadly. "I helped design it, actually. Esperanza was one of the founding investors. This facility has been operating since 1954, though we've upgraded the technology considerably over the decades." He gestured to the walls of safety deposit boxes. Goldfield Junction serves a very specific clientele, people who need to store valuable items with absolute security and complete anonymity. Swiss bank accounts are convenient, but they're not physically secure. This location offers something unique. A private banking facility hidden beneath an abandoned train station in the middle of the American desert. Marcus was studying the computer displays with fascination. But why here? Why build it in the middle of nowhere? Precisely because it's nowhere, Dr. Chin explained. No one thinks to look for a bank vault beneath an abandoned railway station. The original investors included some very wealthy individuals who needed a place to store assets away from government oversight, divorce proceedings, and tax authorities. Completely legal, but completely private. Isabella's head was spinning, and Esperanza was involved in this. She was more than involved. She was instrumental in its creation. Your great-aunt was a remarkable woman, Miss Moreau. Much more remarkable than she ever let on. Dr. Chen led them to a specific section of the facility, where larger vaults were secured behind reinforced doors. He produced a key from his jacket pocket, an ornate brass key that Isabella recognized as identical to the ones that had come with her inheritance. Esperanza left specific instructions, he said, unlocking one of the larger vaults. Everything in Vault 247 belongs to you now. The vault door swung open to reveal shelves lined with documents, photographs, and storage containers. But it was the contents of the containers that made Isabella's knees weak. Gold bars, neatly stacked and gleaming under the LED lighting. Bundles of currency from various countries, some so old they belonged in museums. Rare coins in protective cases, precious stones in felt-lined boxes, and bearer bonds worth millions of dollars. "How much?" Isabella whispered. Dr. Chun consulted a tablet computer. The current valuation of Vault 247's contents is approximately $189.3 million. Your great-aunt was a very astute investor, and she spent 70 years accumulating and protecting this wealth. Isabella sank into a nearby chair, struggling to process what she was seeing. But how? She lived in a tiny apartment. She worked as a seamstress. I remember her clipping coupons. Esperanza understood something that many wealthy people never learn. Dr. Chun explained gently. True security comes from invisibility. She lived modestly by choice, not necessity. Every penny she saved went into investments, and she stored the returns here, completely off the grid. Marcus was reading some of the documents with wide eyes. "Mom, look at this. It says she owned part of Apple when it was just starting, and Microsoft, and something called Bitcoin when it cost like $10. Dr. Chin nodded. She had an extraordinary gift for identifying undervalued investments. But more importantly, she had the patience to hold them for decades while they appreciated in value. Isabella picked up a photograph from one of the shelves. It showed a much younger Esperanza standing beside the train station, which was clearly operational at the time. She was wearing a simple dress and smiling at the camera, but there was something in her eyes that Isabella had never noticed during their brief meetings, a sharp intelligence and quiet confidence. The train station was never really abandoned, was it? Isabella asked. Oh, passenger service ended in 1982, just as the records show, Dr. Chin confirmed. But we maintained the facility as cover for our operations. Esperanza lived in the area for years, keeping an eye on things, making sure our security remained intact. Isabella stood and walked among the shelves of her inheritance, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she'd been given. It wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom from night shifts and medical bills, and worrying about Marcus's college tuition. Freedom to give her son opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. But with that freedom came questions that made her deeply uncomfortable. Act 2. The Weight of Truth. 8 to 10 minutes. Dr. Chun, Isabella said carefully. You mentioned that this facility serves people who need privacy from government oversight. Are we talking about illegal activity? The older man's expression grew serious. That's a fair question, and one your great-aunt asked frequently. The answer is complicated. He led them to a conference room area where they could sit comfortably. Goldfield Junction operates in what you might call a legal gray area. We don't ask clients about the source of their wealth, and we don't report transactions to any government agency. For some clients, this represents legitimate tax planning. For others, he shrugged. We've stored assets for technology executives avoiding insider trading investigations, celebrities hiding income during divorces, and foreign nationals protecting wealth from unstable governments. Some of our clients are undoubtedly criminals. Others are simply private individuals who believe their financial affairs are nobody's business but their own. Isabella felt a chill. So this is basically money laundering. Not exactly, Dr. Chen said. We don't transform dirty money into clean money. We simply store whatever people bring us, no questions asked. Think of us as a very secure storage facility that happens to specialize in valuable items. Marcus looked up from the documents he'd been studying. But Mom, look at what Great-Aunt Esperanza kept here. It's all legitimate stuff, stock certificates, real estate deeds, gold she bought legally. She wasn't hiding stolen money. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. Esperanza was one of our most ethical clients. She used the facility exactly as intended, to protect legitimately acquired wealth from taxes, inflation, and government interference. She believed, quite strongly, that individuals should have the right to financial privacy. Marcus looked up from a folder he'd been examining. Mom, this says Great-Aunt Esperanza owned 30% of the facility. If you inherit that, you'd be like a major partner in running this place. Dr. Chen nodded. That's correct. Esperanza was one of the founding investors, and her ownership stake has grown over the decades. If you choose to accept the full inheritance, you would become the facility's largest single shareholder. Isabella walked back to the vault entrance and looked out at the vast underground complex. Hundreds of safety deposit boxes lined the walls, each containing someone's secrets, each representing a decision to hide wealth from the outside world. She thought about her life as a nurse, the simple satisfaction of helping people heal, the clear moral boundaries of her profession. This world of financial secrecy and legal gray areas felt foreign and dangerous. But she also thought about Marcus, about the opportunities this inheritance could provide him, about the freedom it would give them both. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Dr. Chun smiled understandingly. Of course, these are not decisions to be made lightly. Take as much time as you need. The facility isn't going anywhere, and neither is your inheritance. Isabella spent the next 3 weeks researching everything she could about private banking, asset protection, and the legal implications of financial privacy. She consulted with lawyers, accountants, and investment advisors, never revealing the full scope of what she'd discovered, but asking detailed questions about theoretical scenarios. The more she learned, the more she understood that Esperanza's world existed in the spaces between laws, in the gaps where regulations didn't quite reach. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't entirely legitimate either. Marcus, meanwhile, had become fascinated with the historical aspects of Goldfield Junction. He spent hours researching the original railway line, the economic conditions that had led to its construction, and the social changes that had made it obsolete. His school history teacher, impressed by his sudden interest in mid-20th century transportation infrastructure, gave him extra credit for a presentation about abandoned railways in the American West. You know what's really interesting, Mom? Marcus said one evening as they worked on homework together. The whole reason they built that railway line was because of the Cold War. The government wanted backup transportation routes in case the interstate highways got bombed. Isabella looked up from her nursing journals. Really? Yeah. And they built way more infrastructure than they actually needed because they were planning for worst-case scenarios. That's probably why the station is so big and why it has all that underground space. It was a revelation that put Esperanza's operation in a new light. The facility hadn't been built to hide criminal activity. It had been built by the government as part of Cold War contingency planning. When the railway was abandoned, Esperanza and her partners had simply repurposed existing infrastructure for private use. That weekend, Isabella drove back to Goldfield Junction alone. She needed to see the place again, to stand in that underground vault and decide what kind of person she wanted to be. Dr. Chun was waiting for her, as if he'd known she would return. "Have you made a decision?" he asked. Isabella walked among the safety deposit boxes, thinking about the people who had entrusted their most valuable possessions to this hidden place. Some were probably criminals, but others were likely just private individuals who valued financial independence above social conformity. "I want to accept the inheritance," she said finally. "But with conditions." Dr. Chin raised an eyebrow. "What kind of conditions?" "First, I want complete transparency about our current clients. If anyone is storing obviously stolen property or the proceeds of violent crimes, they need to find somewhere else to keep their assets." "That's ambitious. Many of our clients value anonymity above all else. Then they can find another facility." "Second, I want to establish legitimate uses for this place. Maybe we partner with museums to store artifacts, or with families to preserve important documents. Something that gives us a legal foundation beyond just hiding rich people's money." Dr. Chun was quiet for a long moment. Esperanza would have approved of those ideas. She often worried that we were enabling behavior we didn't entirely approve of. "And third," Isabella continued, "I want to use some of the wealth for something meaningful. Education scholarships, medical research, something that actually helps people instead of just protecting rich people's assets." Dr. Chin smiled. "Now you're talking like your great-aunt. She always said that wealth without purpose was just elaborate hoarding." Over the following months, Isabella gradually transformed both her life and the Goldfield Junction facility. She reduced her hours at the hospital but didn't quit entirely. She'd worked too hard for her nursing license to abandon it completely. Instead, she used her medical background to establish a foundation that provided healthcare access to undocumented immigrants and rural communities. The facility itself underwent what Dr. Chin diplomatically called client optimization. Several of their more questionable customers were politely encouraged to find alternative storage solutions, while new partnerships were established with universities, historical societies, and legitimate financial institutions. Marcus thrived in his new circumstances, but Isabella was careful to maintain the values that Esperanza had admired. He still did chores, still worked for his allowances, and still understood that privilege came with responsibility. One evening, as they sat on the platform of Goldfield Junction watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and red, Marcus asked the question Isabella had been expecting. "Mom, are we rich now?" Isabella considered her answer carefully. "We have enough money that we don't have to worry about paying bills or affording college. But rich isn't really about money, Mijo. It's about having choices and using them wisely. Like Great-Aunt Esperanza did." Exactly like Great-Aunt Esperanza did. As the stars began to appear in the desert sky, Isabella felt a deep sense of peace. The inheritance had given them financial security, but more importantly, it had given them purpose. The underground facility hummed quietly beneath their feet, no longer a secret to be hidden, but a resource to be used responsibly. Esperanza's final gift hadn't just been money. It had been the opportunity to understand that wealth was worthless unless it was used to create something meaningful. The abandoned train station that everyone had dismissed as worthless junk had become the foundation for a new kind of legacy, one that honored the past while building toward a better future. In the distance, a coyote called across the desert, its voice carrying on the night wind like an echo of all the secrets that had been buried beneath the sand and stone of Goldfield Junction. But this secret, at least, was no longer hidden. It was alive, growing, and ready to serve something larger than itself. The desert night was vast and full of possibility, and Isabella Moreau finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy.